Okay, so this is a brief overview of this Silver Crest digital radio that's currently available from Lidl in their fabled middle aisle. It's £24.99 in the UK. I'd imagine it's available in different territories wherever Lidl operates. And I'd read a little bit about this radio on a couple of forums that I occasionally frequent, and just wanted to find out for myself if it's any good. If it'll serve as a good kind of kitchen shelf radio, or if it might do a little bit more than that in terms of, radio as a bit of a hobby rather than just a kind of passive listening exercise. It's marketed as a digital radio. It is a DAB plus and FM radio, and that's kind of important because certainly here in the UK we have a mixture of DAB and DAB plus digital radio signals. DAB Plus offers certain advantages over the original DAB standard, and quite a lot of stations are now available only in DAB Plus, and so older radios or radios that are still sold actually without this DAB Plus feature will miss out on that. And it's good to see that this is a standard radio that someone can walk into a shop and buy, and it has DAB and DAB Plus. But it also has FM, so it covers most people's use cases quite nicely. It was actually a bit smaller than I expected when I was looking for it on the shelf. I think I had in mind the kind of Roberts and Pure kind of desktop, tabletop kind of radio sizes. This is a fair bit smaller than that, I would say. It's fairly, it's not quite pocketable. It would be, fairly chunky. You could stick it in your pocket if you had to, but it's it's sort of palmish sized, and it takes 4 AA batteries, which are included, which is always nice. It can be powered by 4 AA batteries. No idea how long that might last for. The rule of thumb tends to be that listening on FM, you get a lot more battery life than you do on digital radio, but I haven't had this long enough to test that out just yet. You also get bundled with a little USB, micro USB cable that plugs into the side, and so it can be powered on the mains. It doesn't include a power plug, but that's probably for the best. I think most of us now have USB plugs scattered around the house, or plug sockets with USB built in, so it's quite nice that it's can be powered on battery, or it can be a mains powered device. So it can serve multiple purposes. Had a little look through the instruction manual. One interesting fact about this, having been purchased in the UK, is that as soon as I turned it on, it was in German. Now, Lidl's a German company. Some of the text on the box is obviously German. It's in various languages, but it's been imported from Germany, and it's interesting that the menu hadn't been set to English, or that wasn't the default. I'll show you in a moment how to change out of that when you turn it on, because the first thing that will happen when you turn this radio on is it will immediately switch to the digital radio mode, the DAB mode, and start scanning for stations, which is great. So you may find that when you turn it on, you weren't kind of ready for it to do a scan. You might not have the aerial up, you might not be in the best possible place in your house for radio reception, so you might need to do a scan again once you've set that up. But that's the first thing it does when you put the batteries in and you press the power button at the top right here. Let's move all this out of the way. So the radio itself, it's it's as I say, nice smallish form factor. It is basically black plastic. I've had a few things recently where I've thought that it was going to be kind of blue. This is basically black. It's a nice kind of subtle design. There's nothing screaming at you. The Silver Crest kind of logo print is about the most kind of obvious thing on the unit. As I say, on the side, it's got a headphone socket and a USB jack. It's got a built-in telescopic whip antenna. It goes to probably, if I can actually get it out, probably 30 centimetres, something like that, and perfectly reasonable, nothing crazy. Battery panel for the 4 AA batteries, a little bit of standard information, rubbery feet to stand up on, nothing on this side apart from this very strange kind of protuberance they've kind of built into it. I presume that's literally just the shape of the speaker that they decided to include, and it didn't quite fit with their profile that they were looking for, so it's got this kind of weird elbow sticking out there. But anyway, we'll turn it on. I'm going to jump straight to FM and then talk a bit about digital radio separately, and then at the end we'll talk about, you know, possible use cases, and a bit of a summary. So we'll turn it on. It's one of those things where it's you kind of don't feel like you've turned it on quite properly. I'll just turn the volume right down whilst we're chatting about it. You kind of have to like press it for like a split second longer than you think you're going to, but anyway, it comes on. I think when the batteries get put in as well. One thing I will do for this video particularly is go into the menu and change the backlight setting, mainly so that you can see what I'm doing really. The auto backlight setting there is set to on, which means that the backlight turns off after about half a minute, something like that, which is good because it's running on batteries at the moment. You wouldn't want the backlight on the whole time. We'll go back out to the menu. We're in FM mode at the moment. I mentioned the language at the start, so the very first thing you might need to do once it's done its little scan of digital stations is actually change the language to English or your preferred language. So what I had to do is press and hold the menu button. We go to the menu, see it says scan settings. You navigate with the left and right buttons, so I'll go across to system, and I think system was in, I would say English. It was readable in German, so I was able to see what system was. OK, and then scroll through alarm, time, backlight level, auto backlight, and then you get to the language. Now in German, I think that word was Sprach, S-P-R-A-C-H-E, forgive my German. Went into language, and then I was able to select English, and there's German, Italian, French, Dutch, Spanish, Swedish, Danish, Polish, Czech, I presume, Slovenian. I don't know. There's a few others, but English was there. So, but yeah, it's interesting that it wasn't set to English, even though it was made for the British market. It actually says on the docs that it's made for the British market, but the language hadn't been set. It's kind of a weird out-of-box experience, but that's how it goes. So we'll look at FM now. I'm in a kind of strong signal area. I know the kind of stations that I can get when I just pull out an FM radio and do a sort of band scan. I basically get the BBC national stations. I get one, possibly two local BBC stations. I get one or two commercial stations, and that's kind of it. I'll get into things like DXing later into the video, but you know, I occasionally get French stations coming over across the channel. My location's kind of on the south coast of England, but basically, you know, you're getting 10 or 12 signals when you do a band scan on this, and I'll show you that in just a moment. So there's a couple of ways to scan around FM. I'll just pop the aerial up just for the benefit of the doubt, but as I say, I get a fairly good signal for the main stations on FM. Even with an aerial down, it's a nice strong signal area here. Probably the easiest thing to do, and it's almost like what will happen from the moment you turn it on, is to press this middle button that says OK/AMS, and I think that's auto memory search, something like that. So if you press and hold AMS, it will say P1, P2, P3 auto scanning, and it's kind of going through the frequencies, just scanning for available signals, and fairly quickly it will have gone through the whole FM band and created a memory preset for every signal that it finds. And you'll probably find that it picks up multiple versions of Radio 2, Radio 3, etc. It goes back to P1, which is obviously the first signal that it found, and for me that's a weak signal of Radio 2, but that's fine. There is a way to prune stations that it's picked up that you actually don't want to have stored as a preset. I won't get into that because it's in the manual, it's beyond the scope of this video. Once you've done this mode, you're in this kind of P1 mode. You can use the left and right skip buttons to kind of go through each of the presets, so P1, P2, P3. You'll see there that the frequency changed to BBC Radio 2, so it obviously picked up a decent enough signal, and there's now some RDS text scrolling along the bottom. I will say it's very nice that it has RDS. I've got some pocket, radios that are much more full featured than this, and they lack RDS, and it's quite a nice feature to have. It's a fairly basic one, to be honest. I've got other radios that are 20-30 years old that have got RDS and it works perfectly well, but it's weird to find some radios that don't have that. So this is a good standard feature set, so it's nice to see. And yeah, moving through the preset stations, leave it on there for a few seconds and you'll see the details appear when it picks up a signal. I'll put the volume up briefly. I'll talk about sound quality a little bit later, but what I will say is that skipping from preset to preset is fairly slow. I was kind of expecting it to be a bit more kind of punctual in changing stations, but if I press the preset button to go to the next preset, you get this kind of 3 or 4 second pause where the audio just blocks out, and all it was doing was jumping from one Radio 3 to the other. So I'll go back again. And it's a good, good few seconds there. So we'll keep going forwards from Radio 3 to Radio 4. And it is in there somewhere. I think it's the Archers playing, so it's quite quiet anyway. I'll go from this one to the next one. It's picked up a couple of frequencies for Radio 4. But it definitely takes a few seconds to go from station to station, which is a little bit disappointing. I mean, it depends what you're going to be using this radio for. Often you're going to want to have this just sat on a shelf, Radio 4 playing, nothing else happening. It'll do that for 15 years and you'll never need to retune it. Other people might want to jump between stations reasonably quickly, see what's on Radio 3, see what's on Radio 4. It's just a little bit of an annoying delay, which seems kind of hard to fathom in 2022 with a digital radio. It's FM, but it is a PLL radio inside. I guess that's just the way it is with this level of radio, but it's interesting. It's something that's caught me by surprise, I would say. It's not a deal breaker, but it is what it is. So yeah, you can see the RDS text scrolling by as it goes through. If you press the info button, this top left button, it's info and menu. If you press info, you'll get a signal strength meter, which is quite handy just to kind of confirm if the signal is strong enough for your selected station. It then just scrolls through the RDS text. There's a drama playing at the moment. That's the frequency we're on. It's currently in mono. Time, date, and then back to the start. Now you can go into the menu and change a couple of things about the FM band. Press and hold the menu button, you get a scan setting. Now scan setting is either all stations or strong stations. Strong stations only, I'm guessing, is only going to pick up stuff that is over a certain threshold, and it's going to deliberately skip over anything that's a bit weaker. In my experience, this has never made any difference. You get your stations or you don't, and the ones that it doesn't pick up, it wouldn't pick up in the all stations mode anyway. I'll show you a bit about manual tuning in a moment, but it feels like that doesn't really make much difference, so I've just tended to leave it in all stations just by default, because hey, that's what harm can it do. Audio setting, if you go into that, you've got stereo allowed and forced mono. Stereo allowed basically means that if the FM station is putting out an FM stereo signal, it'll try and decode it. Doesn't really matter for most uses, and in fact the instruction manual kind of recommends you put that back into mono unless you're plugging in headphones, because obviously the single mono speaker here doesn't make any difference whether it's picking up stereo or not. It'll only actually do that when you've got a headphone or another speaker plugged into it. So it's good to know that it does have stereo output on the headphones. I haven't actually tested that out, but it's it's a feature. Handy if you're going to plug it into a hi-fi or an auxiliary speaker. Yeah, we'll change that just now. Don't know why I'm holding AMS, that was silly. That's going to do a little scan. Let's see if we can get out of that. Yeah. So that's kind of, you know, FM. The final thing I would say is, let's go back to the menu. So we've got the scan setting, the audio setting, and then the system menu, which the system menu is just basically for changing things like the backlight level, the alarm, the time that's set. The time obviously gets set by magical radio waves, so you should never need to set the time as long as you've got a radio signal, but it's an option there if it picks it up and it's wrong. The final way to really tune this radio in FM mode is if you press Fav and search, you get FM fine. Now FM fine means that you can actually start, you know, going up through the frequencies one by one, 89.3, 3.5, 4. And I'll pop the volume up just to show you what that's like, because it's a fairly slow process. So press it once again. And you get that same very slow change between frequencies. You know, it's this kind of 2, 3, 4 second delay between changing the frequencies. So I think, unfortunately, as a kind of radio enthusiast device, in terms of the people that might enjoy taking a radio with them, tuning around the frequencies to see what they can get, it's not a very enjoyable radio to tune around manually. You know, it certainly doesn't have a dial for tuning up and down the frequencies, and it doesn't really let you quickly jump from frequency to frequency. You've really got to either plug in the frequency that you want just to check if there's a signal. So, you know, we can do that with Classic FM. Let's go to a station that's near Classic FM for us. Well, we can't really do that. Let's press that, and we'll press and hold this scanning button. I think when you press and hold the up and down button, it sort of goes into scanning mode, so it'll kind of home in on frequencies where there's a station, which is cool. And we'll try and get to about 100.9. So it's going to sit on 102, which is, I think, heart. There we go. So I'll press the Fav button to get into fine tune mode. So if we now go to 100.9, which I think is Classic FM, and then try that, so we'll turn the volume up, and it does pick it up. It's fairly weak, so it didn't find it on the actual auto scan. I'll go to the little signal strength meter, and you can see that it's, you know, 2 or 3. If I touch the aerial, it boosts it a little bit, so I can tell that it would pull that signal in fairly well if it had some sort of longer antenna attached, or if it was in a slightly better position. But that's kind of your best case scenario for tuning in a specific station, if it's not picking up the kind of thing that you want to listen to, or if you want to tune around the bands. It's not going to be a very enjoyable process for doing that. But that is the FM portion of this radio. The sound quality has so far been pretty good. The volume goes up pretty loud. I've been trying it out for a few minutes, listening to sort of talk radio on Radio 4 and classical music on Radio 3, and both sound, you know, pretty rich. They're not bassy and they're not going to fill the room, but they don't sound tinny and they don't sound too trebly or harsh. So the speaker is a decent compromise for something, you know, this small. It sounds basically fine. The volume goes up fairly loud, I would say. I actually just about tested it at full volume for a few seconds, and you know, there's a tiny bit of distortion because it's kind of about the, you know, the peak that it's going to want to go to, but it's a fairly impressive speaker for what it is, and doesn't sound bad at all. I'd be very happy listening to this. I think it's going to live in our kitchen and become the kind of, you know, bog standard radio there that we just kind of leave on one station and just turn on and off whenever we want it. But it sounds pretty good. And that's on the FM band. I will now jump to DAB. So at the bottom right button is DAB and FM, so just press that once and it switches into the DAB mode. It's already done a scan of all the stations on DAB, and if you're familiar with any digital radios, it's the same kind of setup. When you first turn it on, it will do a full band scan wherever you are. If you want to do another full band scan, you'd obviously press and hold the menu button, and then full scan is one option there, and then you'd say OK. And then what it does is it scans through all the available frequencies, looking for any digital radio multiplexes. It gives you a sort of running total of the channels that it's found. So there's 10, 31, I think it gets up to about 65, which is exactly what I would expect from this location, knowing the kind of signals that I normally get with other radios. I think it'll get to 67, and that's me. It then sorts those all into alphabetical order. Let's jump back to Radio 3 because that's where it was before, and that's kind of it. You've then got a sort of alphabetical list of all your DAB stations. As I say, it is a DAB and DAB plus radio, which is essential now, really. I mean, I think there's always going to be some old school kind of plain vanilla DAB stations. The BBC stations, I suspect, will probably stay DAB just to keep the kind of old hardware running. I don't think they're going to sort of move over to DAB plus. But other stations have, and other multiplexes have, because it enables stations to be broadcast at a lower bit rate but at a higher quality in theory, and the dropout is a little less harsh and a little less kind of disruptive when it happens. I haven't noticed any issues with digital radio on this one. It's got all the kind of standard features of any digital radio that you've used. If you've ever played with it, you can press info to go through the signal strength meter there, type of program, the name of the multiplex that the station is on, the details of the multiplex that it's coming from, signal error. It's not something I've seen on every radio, but it's handy if you're trying to diagnose, if the signal is being choppy for whatever reason. It might give you some indication there. And of course the bit rate and the type of codec that's in use, DAB or DAB+. BBC Radio 3 being a great example of, about the best quality digital radio station that you can pick up in the UK. You'll find with the sort of commercial multiplexes a real range of bit rates in use. You've got things going down to 24 kilobits per second DAB plus, and playing music, and it's a real range of codecs in use. BBC Radio 3 being the sort of example of probably certainly highest bit rate and highest audio quality. BBC Radio 3 is the sort of classical music station, and so it tends to be the station they test and run the best quality audio on, just to kind of ensure that it sounds good for the listeners. As you go down the smaller and smaller digital radio multiplexes, you'll find more and more stations being crammed in together just for commercial reasons, really, and being given smaller and smaller amounts of bandwidth and lower bit rates to play with, and you get to a point where it starts to sound pretty crunchy and pretty robotic. So it's a weird compromise that we've come to in the UK. I think on the continent, digital radio has been done differently depending on who has been setting it up. In France, I think it tends to be the case that most multiplexes have a sort of standard 88 kilobits DAB plus for every station regardless, just as a sort of standard. And I think there's a lot of kind of work that gets put into the pre-digital phase, the kind of filtering and the kind of the way the audio gets kind of pruned and tweaked before it actually gets digitized and sent out to the digital transmitters, which is perhaps less well taken care of on some of the smaller commercial stations in the UK. But back to this radio, does a perfectly good job. Sound quality's fine. This is playing some quite beefy classical music. And of course that won't translate well on this video, but yeah, it sounds fine. It is loud enough to stick in the corner of a room and be perfectly happy with the quality of it. Goes up pretty loud, as I say. It does start to distort at the maximum volume, but you wouldn't want to leave it on the maximum volume for long. Going beyond the kind of standard use of digital radio, if you're into your DXing and tuning to less strong signals with digital radio, you can kind of do that. If you press and hold the menu button, obviously full scan is the first setting. The second one is manual tune, and if you've ever played with digital radios and played with their menus, you'll be familiar with this kind of arrangement where you get the name of the multiplex, 5A, and their frequency, 5B, 5C, 5D. So I'll go to one that's, I think, got a signal, and then press OK, and then you get the signal strength meter, and you'll see that it's just at the bar of picking up a signal. And once it picks up a signal, the top bar, the top line rather, tells you what multiplex it's picking up. So it looks like it's trying to pick up Sussex there. So it's just on the sort of cusp of being a signal that it would be happy to decode. And then you can press OK, and it will go back to the station that it was playing before. I would say then that digital radio DXing is a bit of a sort of black and white thing. It either works or it doesn't, but the fact that you've got this kind of manual tune feature is better than nothing, but I think it's a fairly standard feature of this kind of digital radio chipset. So I'll go back to FM. There's a few features like the alarm and the snooze and the sleep timer that I won't go into because it's fairly standard stuff and it's all in the instruction manual. But I would say as a nice little mini kind of shelf radio or kind of tabletop radio, it does a pretty good job. For 25 quid, you can't really go wrong. It's not the most kind of high quality product, but it's small and neat. Has a reasonably clear screen. The scrolling starts to go a little bit kind of blurry when it's constantly sort of scrolling across, but it's perfectly readable. The backlight's nice and bright. You've got some control over the level of the backlight and also how long it stays on for. Runs on 4 AA batteries, so it makes it really nice and portable. It would be interesting to see how long it lasts on 4 AA batteries. I think it'll depend on if you're on FM or digital, and it really depends on how long this backlight stays on for, so there are settings to change that. I think from the instruction book, when it's on mains power, the backlight stays on all the time, so it's more of a kind of permanent feature then. But yeah, it's a really nice kind of compact standard FM digital radio. Press the off button and it says power off. When it's in the sort of off mode, there's no display on the screen, certainly in battery mode, but apparently if you sort of press and hold a button that isn't the on off button, it does tell you the time and the date for a few seconds, which is handy. I'm not sure if in the mains power it would have that on all the time. But yeah, it's a nice neat little radio. It performs as adequately as I would expect it to, which seems a really boring thing to say, but you kind of never know what you're going to get with fairly budget radios that you pick up from a grocery store. But I would say, yeah, this little Silver Crest digital radio is a fine little purchase, and if you're looking to replace a radio or add a digital radio to a room that doesn't have one, this would be a perfectly fine example to do that. Personally, I have had to replace a really nice little Pure radio that I had that has stopped functioning for some reason. I've had it apart, I've kind of tried to diagnose some faults with it. I got to the point where I just needed to replace it and be done with it, and this is a great example of that. Like, it's a really affordable, small, functional thing. Sounds fine. I'm sure it'll last several years. I think it feels chunky and kind of rugged. I wouldn't want to take it out and about too much, but equally I think it's small enough that you could stick it in a bag if you really wanted to. You could certainly take it away travelling if you wanted a radio to take with you and stick on the bedside table, and with the alarm functions that would be really handy. But yeah, that is pretty much all I have to say about such a sort of basic normal radio, but it is a basic normal radio. It performs its functions very nicely. And you know, if you're in the market to replace a radio or pick one up for someone, you could do a lot worse than this. And that's pretty much it, really. It's always worth checking out what's on the middle aisle of Lidl. You get little bargains like this occasionally. And yeah, I was glad to have heard about this one through some radio forums that I follow, and I kind of just wanted to pick it up for myself and see what the quality was like, and see if it was a decent purchase or not, and I think it is. So there we go. Hope you enjoyed, and 7 threes.